Have you ever wondered why people in the Wild West almost never bathed? The answer most people expect is simple. They were careless. They lived in dust-covered towns, had no water nearby, and simply didn't care about hygiene. It's the image movies sell us: the dirty cowboy, the dusty hat, the clothes that never change. But that answer is wrong. The truth is far more disturbing and far more interesting, because in the Wild West, bathing wasn't just inconvenient. In many cases, it could be dangerous. And understanding why reveals something movies never show: what it actually took to survive in that environment, in that time, under those conditions. Let's start by dismantling the biggest myth about hygiene in the Wild West: the idea that people simply didn't care about being clean. That's not true. What was true is that their reality was completely different from ours, and when you place the two side by side, you start to understand why everything that seems obvious to us made absolutely no sense to them. Think about your day today. You wake up, maybe still half asleep, walk to the bathroom and turn on the faucet without a second thought. Hot water in seconds, controlled temperature, constant pressure, soap, shampoo, conditioner, a clean towel, all within arm's reach. In 15 minutes, you're clean, dry, ready to go. Now, imagine the exact opposite of that. In the Wild West, none of that existed. No plumbing, no faucets, no running water inside the home, because in most cases there wasn't even a real home, just a wooden cabin, a tent, or a makeshift camp set up along a trail. Water had to be found, carried, stored, protected. A well could be miles away, a river could be on the other side of a hill, and getting to that water wasn't a leisurely walk. It was a task that consumed time, energy, and required constant attention, because the West was an environment that did not forgive carelessness. And that water, once you finally had it at home, wasn't just for bathing. It was for drinking, for cooking, for cleaning wounds, for the animals, for everything. Every single drop had a real cost. So when a Texas farmer in 1870 came home after 12 hours of work under a 100-degree sun, muscles aching and hands cracked open, the question wasn't, should I take a bath today? The question was, do I have enough water to survive tomorrow, to give the horses, to cook dinner? Using precious water to wash your body when it could mean the difference between eating or not, between the horse surviving or not, that wasn't even a consideration. It was a luxury that simply didn't exist in the vocabulary of those people. That's not negligence, that's pure survival calculus. But there was something even more serious than water scarcity, something most people never consider when they think about this. Across much of the American frontier, the water that was available was actively dangerous. Rivers and streams in the West looked clean. Sometimes the water was crystal clear, cold, with that appearance of purity that makes you want to dive right in. But what was inside it was invisible to the naked eye, and it could kill you. These waterways were frequently contaminated from dozens of different sources: waste from wild animals and cattle drinking upstream, military camps that discarded refuse with no oversight whatsoever, rapidly growing towns like Denver or Abilene, which in the 1860s were little more than a dirt street with no sanitation system at all. Everything ended up in the rivers. And people had no way of knowing. There was no water testing, no public warnings, no guide telling you which source was safe and which wasn't. The water could look perfect and still be loaded with bacteria, parasites, or fecal contamination. The consequences were real and well documented. Cholera was one of the greatest tragedies of the Great Westward Migrations. Between 1840 and 1870, as hundreds of thousands of settlers traveled the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail, cholera killed an estimated 30,000 people, more than any attack, more than any accident, more than any other single cause, and the disease spread primarily through contaminated water. Typhoid fever was endemic across many territories. Soldiers at western forts died from it regularly. Farmers contracted it from wells they had been using for years, never knowing the water was contaminated. Dysentery was so common that military physicians of the era simply stopped recording it as anything exceptional. It was part of life. It was expected.
Hotter than a tin roof out there.
And people noticed all of this. They didn't understand the science behind it. Germ theory only began to take hold in the United States in the second half of the 19th century and reached the interior of the country much later than that. But they saw the patterns. They saw that certain water sources made people sick. They noticed that after a heavy rain, people who drank from the river fell ill in greater numbers. They observed that prolonged contact with water of unknown origin was a risk. So they learned, through trial and error, to minimize that contact. Not out of superstition, out of observation, out of survival. But then, what was daily life actually like without regular bathing? What did people do to manage the constant buildup of dirt, sweat, and dust? They adapted. They created smaller, practical routines that didn't solve the problem, but made life manageable. They scrubbed their face and neck with a damp cloth in the morning. They washed their hands when water was available, especially before eating. They shook out their clothes to knock off the worst of the dust. Vinegar was used as a substitute for soap, which was expensive and scarce in the interior. It had basic antibacterial properties and helped with the smell. Some women rubbed dry cornmeal into their hair to absorb grease, a technique that bears a striking resemblance to what we now call dry shampoo. In larger cities like San Francisco or St. Louis, public bathhouses existed and had a regular clientele. But regular there meant once a week for the more well-off, and once a month or less for most people. A full bath was an event, almost a special occasion, not a daily routine. Historical records from Fort Laramie in Wyoming describe settlers arriving at the fort after weeks on the trail, wearing the same clothes they had left in. Nothing had been washed, nothing had been changed. The journals of military physicians stationed at these posts describe, with an occasionally wry frankness, that the smell of their patients made a physical examination an experience that required considerable willpower. But here's the point that changes everything. Everyone lived this way. There was no contrast. There was no one standing nearby who was cleaner to serve as a point of comparison. The dirt, the accumulated sweat, the smell that would floor us today was the standard, the norm, the expected. And the human brain is extraordinarily adaptable when it has no other choice. What seems unbearable from a distance becomes completely familiar when it's the only reality you've ever known. People didn't feel like they were living in deplorable conditions. They were living the way everyone around them lived, the way their parents had lived, the way their neighbors had lived. What we consider normal when it comes to hygiene is in large part a cultural construction, and in that context, that was normal. It didn't make life comfortable. Skin irritation, minor infections, the constant discomfort of dirty clothing and relentless heat, all of that was part of the experience, but it made life possible, and in the Wild West, possible was the goal. When you look at all of this together, the image of the Wild West shifts completely. It stops being the romantic backdrop from the movies, the free cowboy under an open sky, the lone hero riding through the desert, and it starts to become what it really was, an unforgiving environment where every decision had a cost, where comfort was always secondary, and where making it through the day was, in many cases, a genuine achievement. Water was survival, energy was survival, time was survival, and bathing was what was left over after all of that, which was rarely anything at all. These people weren't careless, they weren't ignorant of the value of cleanliness, they simply lived in a world where the hierarchy of needs was completely different from ours, a world that allowed no luxuries, that forgave no waste, and that demanded every available resource be used with precision. We built a world designed for comfort. We turn on the faucet without thinking, sleep in beds with clean sheets, take a hot shower every day as if it were a natural right, and in a way, it has become one. But less than 180 years ago, for millions of people living in territories like the American West, that was unimaginable. The next time you turn on a faucet, take a moment to remember that. There was a time, not so long ago, when something as simple as clean water on demand wasn't guaranteed. It was earned, it was rationed, and using it in the wrong place at the wrong moment could cost you your life. If this video changed the way you see the Wild West, or even your own daily routine, leave a like. It helps the channel reach more people who enjoy this kind of real, unfiltered history. And if you want to keep exploring what life was actually like in other moments throughout history, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming.